Okay. I was so excited because I found out that Mark Mills was coming to town, and he's one of my favorites of all time for myth busting. Mark is a physicist, so a real scientist.
I used to be, at least.
It used to be, at least. Now with the Texas Public Policy Foundation, which is fantastic, where I used to be once upon a time as an energy fellow. He's a distinguished energy fellow, which is a step up. And so a real scientist, this is the kind of person that supposedly the public believes when it comes to energy and environment issues. There's a ranking. There's like scientists, regulators,
right,
other people, and of course politicians at the bottom.
And media.
And media. I wasn't going to say anything about media. Here is the topic for today broadly. Basically, I'm convinced the world is getting scarier, partially because elites or people who can make powerful moves and decisions believe things that are not true.
Right.
I mean, the big institutions, the most illustrious, august institutions are turning out people, not just in the last 10 years, but people much older than myself even, who...
Can't imagine.
The John Kerrys of the world, the climate czars, the Al Gores who went to my law school before he dropped out. These people either believe things that are not true or are happy to pretend they believe things that are not true to get in line for trillions of dollars that will be redistributed from taxpayers around the world to people like them to solve problems that you and I might see very differently or as even not problems at all.
Yeah.
So here's the deal. I saw this really cool video that you did for PragerU. Mm-hmm. And essentially it's titled, How Much Energy Will the World Need? And you do a great job of explaining the prevailing narrative on an energy transition is physically and mathematically impossible as of today. That's great. So I come away from this convinced, although I already was. I'm sure millions of others did, though, as well. And what concerned me about it is I'm thinking, once people understand what you have to share, and your stuff should be required reading, especially if you're at Davos and elsewhere, or DC, I'm afraid that if elites even understood what you're saying, they might come away with the conclusion, well, the only solution is fewer people, right? You're arguing we need more oil. We need more fossil fuels. They're going to conclude that means less people. They've been saying this for a while now on a number of fronts. And that concerns me too. I think, however, hidden in all of your facts.
Hope it's not too hidden.
No. It's not too. Somewhere we had to connect them together and say, actually, there's nothing to be afraid of. We need to dispel the fear with facts. You told me before this show started, you agree with Elon Musk that the world actually might need more people, not less people.
Well, he didn't say might.
Oh, he didn't say might. Okay.
He said we need more babies.
Yeah. And so you're agreeing with that. You obviously are not losing sleep over energy and environment policies, even though you've had a whole life at this point devoted to understanding the problems and the math. Tonight you're debating at Old Parkland on the future, is it electric vehicles or not? Mm-hmm. So, but before we get to all that, I'd like to start with why before the what. So my question to you, explain why you're not afraid of the future environmentally and why other people should not be either, especially people who are in their 20s and saying, I'm not going to have children.
Yeah.
Because that's a life-changing, life-shattering decision that they need to really understand before they behave or go forward with that expectation.
Well, you put your finger on what is arguably one of the most important and destructive features of our modern society. But it's, by modern, I mean Europe and the United States. It's not true in the rest of the world. Is teaching children to be afraid and depressed, which is, in my view, profoundly immoral.
Yes.
And self-fulfillingly destructive.
Yes.
So if you worried about extreme weather, to use a new locution, that the climate might change. We don't have to debate whether or not humans are impacting the climate. They always impact stuff. We have some impact. My scientist friends in this field are careful to point out, you don't say zero impact. It's just that we can't find the signal. And even the infamous IPCC, the UN body that studies climate change, the scientists in the main body of that research have pointed out recently that all the media hype around extreme weather being caused by climate change, that there's no visible correlation between current weather and so-called climate change. This is all about a theory about the future. But nature has been trying to kill humans for all of the time that humans have existed on Earth. It's not just natural disasters and weather, but pestilences and bugs and viruses. And humans have somehow managed not only to survive, but thrive. And we do that because of, to be philosophical, it's because of information. We have brains, we have capacities, we're tool wielders, we're inventors. It's homo faber, not homo sapien. We are makers of things. Technology is what rescues us from the deprivations of nature. And so then if you're depressed about the future for whatever reason, and there are good reasons to be worried about what nature will do to us, I'm much more worried about what other people will do to us and other potentates and nations.
Yeah.
But if you're worried about what nature will do to us, what risks will be exposed to, we have good evidence throughout history that we're extremely good at inventing workarounds and ways to survive. So if you're more worried about the future than many other people, then what you're essentially saying is there's no progress left in technology. And in fact, I've just published recently a book that is entirely the polar opposite of that. I think we're on the cusp of one of the biggest technological revolutions, an efflorescence of new class of technologies in a century, that people who are young today arguably live at the most exciting time in history. We're going to see more positive change in the next half century and a century than we've seen in the last century. We have every reason to be profoundly optimistic about everything, not about the capacity for humans to want to fight each other and to do horrible things. That's human nature. That hasn't changed. But what has changed is that we have more democracies in the world now than in history. There's been some erosion in that in a recent decade or two, as you know. But by and large, compared to all the history, things are much better than they've ever been. The worry that somehow we're going to have a problem with the climate because of how we use energy is sort of the epicenter of what the Davos crowd worries about, what the climate debate is all about. And that really falls into two camps. One is, if you believe it's true and that we are facing a crisis in the climate because of human activity, then the solution to that is technology to ameliorate the impacts, to have resilience and adaptation. The solution is not to change our energy system. And the reason I know that is because, as you pointed out correctly in an eloquent disquisition of my position, it's impossible. This whole narrative about an accelerating energy transition isn't in the facts. It's not in the data. So it's not what's going on, and it's not what can go on for the foreseeable future. And that's not me making a political statement. So I'm always very careful, especially when I talk to younger people, that I have political opinions, and I'll happy to talk to people about them. But the facts of where we are today, after spending trillions of dollars, so Europe and the United States have spent trillions of dollars in the last 2 decades to effect a so-called energy transition. So as a fact point to start with, roughly 4% of the world's energy now comes from wind and solar.
That's single digit.
4%.
Yeah.
And the percentage that comes from hydrocarbons has declined by a couple of percentage points in 20 years after trillions being spent.
You
2
said
percentage
2%.
points.
Yeah.
So we went from 84% to 82% from hydrocarbons. And it's 82% of a bigger pie. The quantity of hydrocarbons that the world consumes has increased in the last 20 years by an amount equal to adding 6 Saudi Arabia's worth of oil production.
Yeah. Let me stop you for a second.
It's a big world.
When you say hydrocarbon, because some people don't know, that's oil, gas, and coal.
Exactly.
All three.
All three. Hydrocarbons are the magical fuels that offer features that mankind has been searching for centuries. It's not an unsubtle point to say that if oil didn't exist, we'd have to invent it, because it exhibits features that are absolutely remarkable that make a lot of things possible. Not just that you can manufacture stuff from hydrocarbons, all the polymers that make 90% of what's in medical care possible, but it allows you to make airplanes fly and to do something that throughout all of history would have seemed utterly magical, which is to fly at the speed of sound with several hundred people safely around the world. This is crazy stuff. It's impossible to do, literally impossible to do without hydrocarbons. It won't happen any other way.
Very quickly, people think that wind and solar and electric vehicles and batteries are somehow interchangeable with hydrocarbons, oil, gas, and coal.
Right.
Explain very quickly why the electrons that come from wind and solar are not as valuable as hydrocarbons.
Well, it's because they're not available when you need them. So,
and how do you make plastics out of them?
Well,
and how do you make petrochemicals out of them?
So the oil is and get natural gas. Natural gas is used to make fertilizer. Fertilizer is what makes it possible to feed the billions in the world today and not have starvation and poverty. But that feature is the sort of chemical feature. The electrochemical feature of combustion is incredibly interesting. So a battery in an electric car weighs 1,000 pounds. 1,000-pound battery is needed to replace a gasoline tank with fuel in it that weighs about 80 pounds. So this is not exactly co-equal from the get-go, but wind and solar have a feature that's interesting. You can get electricity through a very simple, seemingly simple conversion phenomena. And when the wind is blowing and when the sun is shining, the electricity from those machines is cheap. The problem is, it's like saying, well, when the wheat is growing in Russia, the food is cheap, but you've got to get the wheat from Russia to here or grow it here. Food and fuel have to be delivered when humans need it, and where wind and solar fall apart economically and therefore structurally and in an engineering sense is getting them to you when you need them. And if you build an energy system on fueling industry and fueling your homes at nature's whims, you end up literally killing people, which is what has happened through most of human history. If you price wind and solar on the basis of providing it when I need it, instead of being cheaper, it's actually anywhere from 300 to 500% more expensive than conventional energy sources.
Yeah, I just got into a large X fight on the ERCOT account. You can look it up, where I'm arguing with people about exactly this point.
Yeah.
They do not understand that these newer forms of energy are far more expensive, and it takes more than 280 characters maybe to explain it. But very quickly, and I commend this to everyone's reading, one of my favorites, your greatest hits, is the hard math of minerals, and also the new energy economy and exercise in magical thinking. One really basic fact I pulled from there that I repeat to people regularly is, if you believe in the ongoing prevailing narrative about an energy transition from fossil fuels and nuclear to wind and solar, then you need to understand we're going to have to multiply mining,
right,
which they tend to not like,
right,
by about 1,000%, tenfold.
Right.
So the mining capability to do what is being preached at Davos does not exist right now, right? It doesn't exist. We're mandating things that don't exist. And so that alone, that's just one really amazing fact that you try to get across to people. If the people at Davos and in DC could even understand that much, how much would the conversation change right away? Right. We'd have to start having realistic conversations about what to do next. So if you were advising, if they invited Mark Mills to Davos and said, Mark,
they'd have to pay me a lot to show up. No, go ahead.
Well, as well they should. He was very expensive for me. So as well they should. So if we can get every high school student, college student, Davos member to hear what you have to say, you could wave the wand. Yeah. What would you do right now on energy and environment policy? What would the Mills administration look like?
So let me reinforce something that you said. So another factoid that's important is that we spent trillions, we got a few percent of our energy from wind and solar. And I would say wind and solar will become significant in some sense, not politically or politically significant now. They consume huge sums of money as a distraction to the world's economies. But burning wood is a calibration point. Wood, oldest energy source known to man other than the muscles of animals. Wood supplies 3 times more energy to the world right now than wind and solar combined. So wind and solar haven't beaten wood yet. So there's no energy transition going on. But the attempt to make a transition by using windmills and solar plants and batteries for electric cars, to your point, is extremely minerals intensive. So, in simple math terms, to deliver the same hour of heat, the same hour of computer time, the same amount of materials to society, same amount of food with the so-called renewable path, wind, solar, batteries, you have to increase the amount of minerals that you mine in the world from 400% to 7,000% and even 10,000%, the 100-fold of what we do today to build the machines. These machines are built from copper, aluminum, manganese, nickel, cobalt. So all these minerals, we need them to build those machines. They're not built largely out of steel, the way cars are, and conventional power plants. So the world has enough mineral. I'm not a Malthusian. The crust of the earth has more than enough minerals. That's not the issue. We have more than enough energy in the universe. That's not the issue. The issue is building the machines to get what you need. When it comes to mining, you have to open a mine. You have to dig for copper. So it's very easy to use Dr. Google to look up how much copper does the world produce, how many mines, what does it cost? This is very public data. How much copper will the world need to reach the visions of the Davos crowd? And roughly you have to double world copper production. All right. So what, right? What you'd want to know is how long does it take to open a copper mine? Because we're going to need hundreds of new big mines. Well, according to the International Energy Agency, and so they're a quasi-honest broker on this, 10 to 20 years, average 10 to 12 years to open a new mine, and billions of dollars. All right, so is anybody opening new mines? By and large, no. So this is where the sort of the roadblock or the absence of a bridge to the green future is abundantly clear. You have to have this incredible increase in mining of critical minerals. I don't mean rare earth elements, which get talked a lot about. Rare earth elements aren't rare. They have rare properties. That's why they're called that. They're common, but it's very difficult to build the mines. It takes billions and years. So if the world's not doing that and the world's mining industry is not investing in that level of expansion that fast, then the materials will not be available. So what would happen? If there's not going to be enough copper, stick with copper because you can't do anything in electricity without copper. If the world's short copper, what happens? Well, the markets will bid copper prices up. For the people who want it the most will pay what they have to. So the construction industry, buildings, need copper. You can't build buildings without copper in the wiring systems. Is copper a big share of a building's cost? Not really. So could they bid it up a lot? Sure. In fact, the CEO of Ivanhoe Mines recently said that the bidding wars based on the demands for copper that are being created by the energy transition plans, the bidding wars could cause a 10-fold increase in copper prices. I was like, wow, would that affect building prices? Not a lot. It might add a few percentage costs to the building, but would it affect an electric vehicle price? If copper, just copper, forget lithium, forget the other elements, if just the copper went up 10-fold, you'd add $15,000 to the cost of one EV. So what will happen? The EVs won't get built. The buildings will get built because you can't open the mines up fast enough, which is why I've said over and over again that there is not going to be an energy transition. Doesn't mean we'll never mine enough copper. It just means no one's going to mine enough copper in the timeframes that matter to try to achieve these goals. But if you spend a lot of money trying, we can cause a lot of economic destruction. We can cause a lot of social harm and destruction because the spending is the inverse of productive. It squanders money and also, and as you know, I've written about this, increases geopolitical risks. I hate to use the word exponentially because it's overused, but this is a case where it's accurate. We don't let mining happen in America anymore. This administration has actually reversed mining permits from several existing mines that seek to expand, at the same time as putting policies in place that increase the need for minerals that are mined. So who's the dominant supplier of refined minerals needed for the energy transition? We both know the answer to that question. It's the C word. It's China. China has a 50 to 80% market share in all the critical minerals. Their market share in critical minerals for the energy transition is double OPEC's market share in oil. To believe that they will never exercise any kind of market power, pricing power, or geopolitical influence because of that, you'd have to be incredibly naive to think that'll never happen. Hasn't really happened yet. They did send a warning shot across the bow when the Biden administration ratcheted down restrictions on export of high-end computer chips to China on the basis that they might use them for nefarious purposes for the military, dual use, right? That was the basis. China announced that they were going to consider restricting the exports of graphite because graphite could be a dual-use material. So, well, graphite, who cares? All lithium batteries use graphite. All, not some. China is 90% of the world's graphite. And yes, you could use lithium batteries in a tank and in a Tesla. So it's dual use. They also announced that they were going to consider restricting the export of gallium, a rare element in the periodic table. People, who cares? Well, gallium arsenide is a semiconductor compound. That's how you make all kinds of microelectronic products like lasers, light-emitting diodes, computer screens, computer products, military products. And they said that could also be dual use. So China might restrict exports of gallium. They produce 98% of the world's refined gallium. So this is a really, really risky path that we're taking to increase our dependency on these kinds of minerals.
So it puts another country that might be hostile to us into the driver's seat in terms of making decisions, bowing to what they want, and they make a lot of money. Reminds me a lot of the 70s and OPEC and oil. Even today, oil is the most traded commodity.
By a huge margin. Yeah,
there's not a close second in 2024.
Yep.
And you look at all the green policies, what we call green policies. I've made this argument for years. They all benefit OPEC and Russia.
Right.
And disadvantage the United States,
Correct.
The UK, basically any country that has a First Amendment where people can protest, have free speech, free press, which I adore and cherish and treasure and defend. But I'm saying wherever activists can have money poured into them, maybe from outside, maybe from our competitors, and pressure the government, they can restrict production of fossil fuels or other minerals.
Right.
I don't see them in Riyadh. I don't see them in Tehran. I don't see them in Beijing. I would really admire them more if they went to those regimes and, were just as active, because that's where a lot of the environmental concerns they have lie. But the point is, this is very reminiscent, I think, of the 70s oil shocks, where suddenly we all realize, oh, wait, they all got together and formed OPEC. We are on the receiving end of their whims.
Yes.
And so everyone recognized that's a problem back then. Mm-hmm. Every president since Nixon said, we're going to be energy independent. Just give me a chance. Yep. And it never happened, really, until the fracking revolution came along, and then the scales tipped a lot in our favor. So all that to say, there are winners, because people are listening and saying, well, if what they're saying is true, why are we doing it? And you know something? Let me just make one quick point. One thing I learned by working in Washington for 7 years on Capitol Hill. I was counsel to the subcommittee on the Constitution. I was watching a lot of what was going on, and it struck me very quickly, having lived through Democrat and Republican administrations, what's most common at the top of an administration, in the cabinet level, after the tenure is over, and when the administration changes, those people, I don't care what party they are, they go to work for guess who? Mm-hmm. Or in governments.
A lot of them do. That's right.
And so, and let's not pretend like they didn't know that that was an option while they were in their seats making their decisions.
Yeah. The revolving door is one of the most difficult challenges, right? The revolving door being in government service, going out and doing bidding of corporations, some of which are legitimate. They're American corporations, legitimately we have the right in the Constitution to petition the government. That's called lobbying now. But thank God we have that right. But it can be perverted and distorted, especially when foreign entities are involved. And so, this is one of the only remedy I've decided over the years. And as you know, I betray my age, but I was a child and I worked in the Reagan White House Science Office. And I also witnessed this revolving door phenomena. I guess to this day, I have to say, financially, I regret not leaving the White House Science Office and becoming a lobbyist.
Right.
Because that was the big ticket item. But I did instead was become a technology consultant and work and write about technology and energy, weapons, and Star Wars, which was the strategic defense initiative that I was involved with as a child in the White House. It's a non-trivial problem, but the best way to deal with it, I think, is the remedy is sunlight, making sure people know who's representing who. So pointing these things out helps people understand who's representing who and why. I think you made an extremely important point about the asymmetry in our system versus the other systems, that we have the right to protest here and our enemies have the ability to fund and fuel the protesters here. We knew that. So let's stay out of today. Let's go back to the Soviet Empire when I was a Cold Warrior and worked in weapons research. We know, and nobody would deny, that the Soviets were funding the anti-war movement, the pro-Soviet movement, the pro-communist movement. They did it overtly.
Green movement.
Yeah, the Soviets had a word for that. The useful idiots that were here. That was their. I don't know how to say it in Russian, but there's a Russian expression.
Or at least the grifters.
Well,
they might have known what they were doing.
There's grifters and there's useful idiots who don't know they're being manipulated, but they're being. So both casts. So that was going on big time, and no one today denies that. To think that it's not going on today, to believe that Putin, Iran, and North Korea and China would not look for ways to fund, influence, punk, and help reinforce the inability for America to become a stronger economic power and stronger military power would be profoundly naive. You point at people and blame specific people for being useful idiots because if they're getting that money, they are. No, because I don't know who they are, but it would be. But we know for a fact that it's happening. So again, what's the remedy? Well, the remedy is sunlight, sunshine. Expose arguments. In this case, I can't expose people who are being manipulated because I don't know who they are. So I take on face value personally that people believe things that aren't true because they believe them, not that they're grifters. Grifters exist, but I think in the public debates we're having, they're the minority. They can be influential, but I think they're the minority. I think that a lot of people honestly believe things that just aren't true.
Yes.
And not because they're stupid. It's because it takes work. I mean, you worked very hard to read. I mean, I believe I'm a good writer, but I write fairly dense stuff deliberately because I want to impart facts in a clear way. But you have to work to read and study, and it takes time. And people are busy. They got other things going on. They're reflexively suspicious of people that they think are coming from another political perspective. So this is part of what I hope to do with my new role at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And we announced we're going to create a new national energy initiative of some kind, unnamed yet. But the mission largely, in simple terms, is to try to help inject fact-based information into the debate that people can look at and believe is not coming from a position of bias. Oh, I like oil companies. Oh, I don't like Biden. I could like oil companies and not like Biden, but that should have nothing to do with the physics of batteries or the physics of combustion. It doesn't. So if I can convince people that the path we're on is economically destructive and destructive to the welfare of America at large, I think what I'll call the plurality of people who believe things that aren't true can be converted. It is the case that I think I'd like to take some credit for this, but I've had a lot of help. A lot of people in Washington on Capitol Hill are now worried about the minerals exposure. You see lots of stuff being written about it that wasn't being written when I first testified before the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee almost 10 years ago with the facts that, and I used a very simple fact, I think it was 7 or 8 years ago. The electric cars, batteries, 1,000 pounds. But what I pointed out was it's not just a heavy battery. To make that one battery requires digging up somewhere on Earth, not in America, 500,000 pounds of the Earth for that one car. And that mining is also, it's a lot of mining, it's a lot of environmental impact and a lot of cost. And I remember Senator Manchin at the time said to me, he looked at me and said, Mr. Mills, surely you misspoke. I remember the words you said to me exactly. I heard you say that to make one electric car, we have to dig up 500,000 pounds of the earth. You misspoke. And I said, no, Senator, no, sir. That's correct. It might even be 1 million pounds per car dug up somewhere on earth. And that's where all the environmental impacts, the geopolitical exposure comes from, the costs come from. And since then, New York Times, God bless them, the Washington Post, even 60 Minutes, other traditionally, we'll call left-leaning publications, have done exposés on mining of cobalt in East Congo, on nickel mining in Indonesia, on lithium mining in Chile, and looking at the environmental, labor, and social costs there. Mining is difficult to do cleanly. It can be done that way, but it's an expensive thing to do cleanly. We do that in North America. They certainly do that in the United States and in my homeland. Mexico is pretty good at it, in fact. So I'm all in, more mining. This is great. But I'll come back to where I started and what you were pointing out. Because we can't and aren't mining enough now, everything we do to increase the need for those materials advantages people who are at least as a minimum economic competitors, and given the current geopolitical situation, maybe much more than that.
Right. Well, and if you look at some of these exposés and documentaries of the Congo where we get so much of the material, I mean, clearly this is child labor. These are little teeny children being thrown into mines. It doesn't look, I mean, wearing nothing but a T-shirt, no shoes, no nothing. The safety, the inhumanity, how these companies who do this get a high ESG score
well,
time and again.
This exposes the fiction of ESG.
Exactly.
So you're referring, I reviewed for the Wall Street Journal when it came out, Cobalt Red, the excellent book in which the author, and God bless him, traveled. He's Indian Brit who, because he wrote himself because he was brown in color. He wrote, I can travel into those areas more easily than a lot of white people could. And it made it easier for me to go and see things that most journalists were not, and he's a professor, not a journalist, couldn't see. So he's the one who documented and exposed, and other journalists have since followed, the child labor. And I'm emphasizing that, not because people listening to you and I talk about this might think, it's hyperbole. People always say stuff like that about third world countries. This is not hyperbole. The level of child labor, and they call it's a euphemism for this, artisanal mining, right? Oh. You know, having children, women, and young, old and young, but children especially, working with their hands with picks and shovels in mines is, this is Dickensian. It's like something you don't think is happening in the 21st century. So your question is, how do you get an ESG score from that? Well, he exposes that in the book. You have the fiction of a NGO, a non-government organization, certifying a mine is ESG compliant because the mine told them they aren't employing children. No one goes to inspect whether the mine has in fact told you the truth, and they get the stamp of approval, and everybody can feel fine about it. Cobalt, which is what we're talking about, by the way, is extremely important for making batteries have long life in small packages, and therefore is in essentially all smartphones and laptops. Not in all electric cars. It's in about 85, 90% of electric cars. But in phones, you are getting cobalt from child labor almost without doubt. It's impossible to hide it and impossible to avoid it until we expose, essentially it's a moral criminality that's going on. And it's been exposed, and what's happened? Cobalt production continues.
Yeah, with the same people.
The same people.
In the Congo. I looked into some of the research that came out of Cobalt Red.
Yeah.
So slavery is very real. Yeah. We talk about it like it's past tense, which drives me crazy. My friends who are in this space say there's more slavery in the world today than ever before, which is easy to believe. The population's much bigger than ever before, and nothing has been solved. And it's the same people who are on the receiving end of this, and no one seems to care or object. It's unbelievable that these people get a pass. And so I I talked a lot about ESG. In fact, I should have a whole page on my website about ESG.
Yeah, you should.
And truth in advertising and things like that.
Yeah.
Why using ESG criteria could violate antitrust laws,
Sure.
fiduciary laws,
Absolutely.
tortious interference with contract, consumer protection laws. And now we're finally seeing, actually, Texas Public Policy took the lead on getting a beautiful white paper out on these points. And we're seeing now legal fights to actually ferret this out and expose, wait a minute, we have U.S. law and state law that stands in the way of all of this. So it should be interesting. I think the ESG movement is going to have a day of accounting.
This is back to sunlight and getting facts out that people will believe and putting, when I wrote my piece for the National Academy Journal, Issues in Science and Technology, the hard math of energy minerals, that kind of information from a credible source, well cited, well documented. It's not polemical. I'm not accusing anybody of anything in that piece. It's just facts. So what's happened is that Washington cares because they know that voters care when they learn those facts. So what they do is they try a first order fix. You worked on the Hill, so you know what happens. They pass a law that says that you have to source the minerals responsibly, and that you don't get American subsidies unless you source the minerals from American companies or American trade partners that are transparently on it, yada yada. So what happens in the actual, you write the law elastically with fuzzy language, then the bureaucrats in the agencies, in this case the Commerce Department, get to interpret the rules in a way that, Shazam. Somehow the child labor cobalt works its way through the system of ownership to become compliant with the sourcing laws.
Yes.
So again, we know they care about the issue because they tried to avoid being criticized. We'll just keep bringing sunlight on the issue, and we'll eventually win the battle because the fact they did that proves they do care. They're worried about it, and they should be worried about it.
Well, maybe what they're thinking about is some of their investors, like the new crop, are the millennials who are inheriting all of this money from the older generation, massive wealth transfer.
Are we talking about me? I want to spend it first.
Well, my bio someday is going to be called "I'm Not Dead Yet." You're not dead yet.
Exactly.
Hope not. So you're still here. The people who moved on, pushing this money down to the millennials.
I know.
Who care a lot about the earth. They care about compassion. They care about energy poverty.
Right.
If only they knew what it was. But they care about these things. They're buying these ESG funds. They're being sold to them at much higher fee than everything else. Because why? They're being told, we, the firm that's selling these securities to you, we're doing the hard work for you.
Feel good investments.
Yeah. So you can feel great. Sure, you're going to pay more in fees and make less money. And other people these people here and there will make that fee and take that cut for the ESG nonsense. But I think those are the people we have to get through to, that nobody likes to be duped. Now, they don't like to admit being duped either. That's even harder to get past. But if we get the facts out, this younger generation has to know this is not the compassionate agenda.
Right.
It's the opposite of the compassionate agenda. And so that's the part that I think we're not messaging as well. We're really good at facts.
Yeah. Well, the messaging's, so you've been in Washington, and now you are, whether you like it or not, in media. And in Washington,
it's more fun. Tell you the truth.
I know. Washington and media care about messaging. The political campaigns are about messaging, and the media is about messaging. And the truth is, how you talk to people and the way we get our information across is by virtue of human nature about messaging. However, and you know this, the facts matter. Ultimately, the facts matter. Now, you can fool people, the old adage, some of the people some of the time, well, not all the people all the time. So facts matter. And what matters about messaging is that ultimately you have the facts on your side. And then you're right. You have to figure out a way to explain them that's relevant to whatever cohort you're talking to, whether it's an age cohort or a demographic cohort. So a generation has grown up with smartphones, for example. For me, one way I try to help people understand back to my PragerU video when I talked about the world's going to need a lot more energy. In everybody's heads, it's about cars. I'll buy a more efficient car. Okay, you go, girl. Buy it. I mean, it's nice. I like efficient cars too. But most people, turns out millennials and Gen Zs are not buying the most efficient cars.
That's right.
They're buying SUVs and hot cars.
That's right. And trucks. Pickup trucks
Big
are
time.
hot right now.
Big time.
Yeah.
So, okay. So apparently they're like everybody else, that they like what they like. They like, going to restaurants. They just like different restaurants. But to educate people about their energy appetites, so they're not reflexive anything about trucks, I did a study some years ago and republished it again some years back. I've written about it again recently, is I looked at the energy appetite of internet devices. And it distills to a simple fact when you look at this. Your use of a smartphone, you and I, uses as much electricity, your personal pro rata use of electricity for your smartphone is about the same as your refrigerator. If you're a Gen Z user of a smartphone, you're probably using as much electricity in the network to support your smartphone as 2 refrigerators. And that gets a reaction from most people. They look at the refrigerator, they can visualize it in the smart, how can that be? And then you get to explain about the network, how we build infrastructure, how we build the cloud, how we build communication systems. And guess what? Shazam, it all takes energy and materials. The materials take energy to convert to useful form, and the energy to operate the system is a lot more than most people realize. And the largest growth in electric demand going on in the world today is not from EVs. It's from data centers to make the cloud work. In fact, as of right now, roughly 10 times more electricity is being consumed globally by the cloud than all of the world's 30 million EVs combined.
That's over the top. Yeah, so I remember emails about a carbon footprint of an email, for example.
But that's the least of it.
Yeah.
It's watching a baseball game. It's watching a movie.
Streaming anything.
It's asking ChatGPT a question, because AI is, in energy terms in the internet, equivalent to going from a Lime scooter to a semi-trailer.
Okay, so ancient dinosaurs like me who still like to read real books and hold paper in our hands. Too. Yeah. I'm actually making a good contribution to Earth by remaining on. I love books. I don't like devices. Yeah, I don't like looking at blue screens and as you can see, and actually write carefully and read carefully. These are things being lost, right? So, and because I actually think that these devices harm mental acuity.
I think you're right. Sure, absolutely. And they don't just harm it; they change how you think. And this is a well-known psychological phenomenon, behavioral psychology. Marshall McLuhan had that famous line that you doubtless know back when he studied television in the 1960s. He was a Canadian, and the medium is the message. Remember, he was famous for that. Okay. And what he meant was that the medium, television, impacted the message, how the message was conveyed, and how you absorb the information from the message. The medium itself influenced that. And he began his clinical research on this looking at the printing press. He claimed that how people thought and learned was physically altered, how our neurons wire themselves when we went from an oral tradition to the printed word. Now, he didn't say it was a bad thing. It just changed it. In fact, you and I would probably say it was a good thing. Going from that to television changed it again. And he would have argued it was a bad thing. And going from that to the glowing screen of death on your smartphone as your primary way to get information clearly alters attention span and function. And of course, it gets manipulated infamously by the purveyors of social media and advertising. So the challenge we have in what I do and what you do is to think, all right, I may not like it, but that's how people get information. So how do I get my message to them?
We have no choice but to participate.
You got no choice.
I can't stand social media for 10,000 reasons. I hate it. And what I remember now, it was Neil Postman who wrote Amusing Ourselves to Death.
Correct.
I read it when I was 18. Yeah. I was required reading in my my university. And I didn't own a television for 10 years. Yeah. And I guess I got a television when the war broke out because I wanted to follow. Yeah. And guess what? I forgot to turn it on for 6 months because I don't turn on the television because I object to what it does to the brain. The idea being something like, here's a 15-second ad about one thing. Here's a 30-second advertisement about a completely different topic.
Sure.
So you're not concentrating for longer than a few seconds. Here's this scene. Here's that scene. It absolutely harms.
So you're telling me we're going to broadcast this discussion audio only, and those who go to video will be spanked and told to go to the audio.
Well,
No,
what they will have is more than 10 to 30 seconds at a time
That's exactly.
of programming to focus on. And so, I promise you will be challenged. And you know what this is a must do. You must read if you're a decision maker. Please, if you insist on making decisions for the rest of humanity, please, you must read The Hard Math of Minerals by Mark Mills, The New Energy Economy, and Exercise in Magical Thinking. I thought these two in particular were outstanding. They stay in my stack of stuff for the show. They never come out.
That's
because
great.
I reference them so often.
I like EVs. I like what Elon Musk has done. It's incredible. You cannot explain his success on the basis of subsidies.
Okay.
He's built the subsidies I oppose firmly on all kinds of grounds. However, his success is anchored in it's not explanatory to build a company, set aside the market value of the company. You can't build a car company that makes cars that people will buy on the back of subsidies. They're not enough to explain it. It's because he's done a hell of a job hiring terrific engineers who build a remarkable product. And good on him. No one has managed to build a car company that succeeds with or without subsidies in almost a century. This is impressive.
No, that's true.
But will EVs take over the world? Not a chance. Not in the lifetime of you, me, our children, grandchildren, or their grandchildren. It's not going to happen.
So, it's true that a lot of oil guys here in Texas buy Teslas.
Well, sure.
Number one, because they enjoy them. They like them.
Yeah,
they're
great
a good
fun.
product.
Yeah.
But also, what they're really doing is they want the opportunity. They can't wait for the next 100 people to say, wait a minute, you're an oil guy. Why are you driving a Tesla? Because then they have the chance to say, because it is a natural gas and coal-powered vehicle.
Exactly. Of course. Or you could be like the Norwegians, and in there, they're the biggest buyers of Teslas in the world per capita.
Okay.
Something like 70% of all new cars purchased last year in Norway were electric.
Okay.
20% of the cars on the road in Norway are electric. 80% of the electricity comes from hydropower in Norway.
Okay.
So they can say that they're driving carbon-free cars, they think. When I was in Norway last year giving a lecture, I said, well, I love Norway and Norwegians. In Oslo was south of where my family is from in Canada, so I didn't feel like I was in the north. But I said, every time one of you buys a Tesla, you've just exported 30 tons of CO2 in the hydrocarbons used to manufacture and produce the minerals in the battery for the Tesla they bought. So what does Norway do? They produce more oil than anybody in Europe. And this last year exported a record quantity of gasoline and absolute consumption of gasoline in Norway. Here's the funny thing. 20% of all the cars on the road in Norway are electric now. You would think that would be visible in the data of the per vehicle consumption, all vehicles of gasoline in Norway. It hasn't changed.
Okay.
What has happened? Well, it turns out that most driving for long distances is being done by people with their gasoline or diesel-powered cars. And they because they're wealthy. They're wealthier than Americans. So one of the wealthiest per capita countries in the world. So they can afford to enjoy what a lot of Texas oil men, who are also, God bless them, I hope wealthy, can enjoy a fun car. But that doesn't change the world. It's buying a piece of entertainment because you're wealthy.
This is the secret to the green revolution. You can pollute as much as you want, as long as you can afford the carbon offsets.
Of course.
That's all that's required.
Yeah. Well, they're going to take that away from you too. Don't worry.
Yeah, I know there's a plan in the works, I've been told about that. And also Norwegians, there are only like 4 million of them or something.
Like Manhattan, it's about 6 or 8 million.
I think, Dallas-Fort Worth has more people than all of Norway. They're sitting on this gold mine.
I know.
That is their oil.
Yeah.
So that's why they're wealthy.
Biggest sovereign wealth fund after Saudis.
Mega for just that small country.
From oil and gas.
Which is another reason why we can't look to them for socialism works. It's like, you know what? If I had endless money, I could make anything work.
Yeah.
But okay, those are other shows. I've done many segments on some of these topics. Again, here with Mark Mills. I will be driving him now to his debate, where we will watch him take on Mr. Levine. So I'm very excited about this, all about EVs. Will they stall or accelerate? I will check into whether or not I can get some excerpts or link to a video
Be great.
of that presentation so everyone can follow, hopefully. So, Mark Mills, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks
It
for
has
having
been a
me.
pleasure.